20 to 30% died from direct violence. Now, normally, in genocide studies, we don't accept a division between direct violence and other causes, because we think that violence also may result in death indirectly. For example, if you looked at the history of Native Americans' deaths in the US, you would know that there weren't only those who died from direct violence, but also those who died from smallpox, from being left out in the cold. So that a case could be made that one should look at those who died from direct violence and those who died from indirect effects of violence, as Save Darfur would tell you, from the fact that aid did not reach them in time. Except for one thing. In the case of Darfur, the cause other than violence, desertification and drought, preceded the violence. So that brings us to the third issue. The causes of violence. What was violence the result of? Violence had more than one cause. At least two main causes. One was the civil war in Darfur, and the other was the insurgency and counterinsurgency. These became mixed up at a certain point in time, but they have separate origins and separate causes. Let me explain. The civil war in Darfur begins 1987-89. This civil war has several causes. The deep cause, the distant cause, has to do with the way the British reorganized the land system in Darfur. The British reorganized the land system as a series of tribal homelands, but they made a distinction between peasant tribes, semi-nomads, those with cattle, and nomads, those with camels, so that they gave peasants larger homelands, semi-nomads smaller homelands, because semi-nomads have villages they live in, but 6 months they move around. And the nomads who have no settled villages, who move around all the time, no homeland. Now, this is the deep cause, this kind of land settlement. Second cause is the drought and desertification. The United Nations Environmental Program, in its report of last year, states that the desert moved south 100 kilometers over 40 years. Right? Its report on Darfur. You can read it there. As the desert moved 100 kilometers, this movement reached its high point in the mid-1980s. It pushed the camel nomads of the north down south. As they moved south, they moved to this mountain area, Jabal Mara, which is the lush mountain area. It's the best land in Darfur. It's about 70 kilometers long mountain range. Okay. And began a conflict between peasants and pastoralists, a classical ecological conflict, a conflict about survival. A Darfuri anthropologist by the name of Sharif Harir, who witnessed this conflict and the reconciliation conferences at the end of it, remarked about how the level of atrocities was much higher than in any previous conflict between neighbors in Darfur. And he said he thought it was because life itself was at stake. Right? It was a conflict about land. The peasant tribes said they had the right to the land because it was their tribal land. The nomads said they had the right to the land because they were citizens of Sudan, and every citizen had a right to live off the land, especially at a time of crisis. These were the contending narratives between the two. Then there was a third contributory factor, which was the Cold War. 1980s, mid-80s, late 80s, is the period in which the Cold War in this part of the world focuses on Chad. You have on the one side the tripartite combination, Reaganite America, France and Israel. On the other side, Libya and the Soviet Union. Each arming a different side in the Chad Civil War. The Chad Civil War went on for 40 years after independence in the 1960s. Whoever, if one side was in power in Jamena, the other went to Darfur. It is in Darfur that the Chad opposition mobilized, organized, and armed. Darfur became to Chad the way Eastern Congo became to Rwanda. Just as in Rwanda, the opposition went into Kivu, Eastern Congo. They armed there, they organized there, they trained there. From there, they launched their assaults to replace the government in Kigali. Same in Darfur and Chad. The opposition organized in Darfur. The arms overflow, or the availability of arms, was so easy. An AK-47, it is said, sold for $40 in Darfur in the mid-80s. There was no water, but Darfur was awash with arms. Right. This raised the level of militarization, so not even in power. The present government came into power in 1989, when the first phase of the civil war ended. The charges of genocide were made at the Reconciliation Conference in 1989, when the present government was not even in power. One side accused another side of genocide, and the other side accused this side of trying to drive them out. So that's the civil war, which has continued